Hello, friends. Tonight I will share with you 3 terrifying stories told in the first person. The first is about a quiet suburban street at 3 in the morning, where every move is echoed by something that shouldn't exist. The second takes us to a truck stop shower, where the sound of water wasn't the only thing repeating in the dark. And the third story happens in a lonely mountain cabin, where the silence above your head might not belong to the wind. These stories are not inventions. They are warnings. So turn off the lights, sit back, and listen carefully. Here's the one that made me stop walking my own block at night. I offer this as carefully as I can because even telling it feels like tugging on a thread the street would rather I left alone. I used to like the late walk home from the hardware store, 1.5 miles through a quiet Midwestern neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed like textbook diagrams and the flags slept against their poles. The air smelled like warm tar and cut grass, and the motion sensor porch lights followed me in gentle pulses. It felt safe, almost staged to be safe. That's important. I wasn't looking for fear. Fear came looking for me. It was a Tuesday, edging into Wednesday. I locked up at 2:37 a.m., waved to the cleaning crew, cut across the office park's mirrored windows, and stepped onto Maple the way you step into a well-rehearsed line. 3 blocks down, right on Barrow, left on Claremont, then up the curve to my street. On Maple I passed the beehive buzz of a sodium lamp, the hydrant with a nick in the base where a bike had hit it, a dented aluminum mailbox shaped like a little barn. I knew the route like a song. The whole point of routine is you don't have to think. That's how routine can hurt you. Under the buzzing lamp, I noticed a figure on the opposite curb, hood up, hands deep in a sweatshirt pocket, head tipped slightly down. One person on an empty street adds more than 1 to the math. I felt it in my ribs. I did the sensible thing, kept walking, keys threaded between my fingers the way my mom taught me when I was first learning parking lots. I glanced once, tall, not a kid, and then looked ahead again. The sidewalks were clean, sprinklers clicked in distant yards, porch lights flared and faded like the neighborhood breathing. I told myself, neighbor, insomniac, dog walker with no dog, normal first. I was 10 steps past when I lifted my right hand to scratch my jaw. Across the street, the figure lifted his right hand and scratched his jaw. Not mirror-synced, late. A beat and a half behind me, like a kid following a dance. I paused, my fingers on my skin. 2 more steps. I tugged my sleeve. A beat later, his sleeve tugged. You can explain anything by coincidence once. Twice asks for rent. I stopped to retie my shoe, an easy test, the kind of thing people do at night without thinking. Across the street, the figure stopped, bent down, and fussed with his shoe 2 beats after I did. When I stood, a weight set itself on my diaphragm, the precise pressure your body makes when your brain hasn't got the right drawer for a thing. I kept moving, because standing still suddenly felt like volunteering. At the corner of Maple and Barrow, my favorite dogwood stood in a pale circle from the street lamp, its leaves like paper hands. I turned right. The figure, across the way, turned right too, still a step behind. Porch cameras chimed the soft, two-note ding as I entered, and then, less than 2 seconds later, chimed again as he did. That detail made it worse. House logic recognized us in order. I pulled out my phone and flipped the camera to selfie, not to film him, but to use the wide angle as a second pair of eyes. In the screen, the street behind me organized itself into small comforts: the cracked seam in the asphalt, the faint silver snail trail of last week's rain, the crown of a Japanese maple trimmed too tight. Farther back, softened by distance and glass, my hooded twin lifted his phone in the same wristy motion, late. I made a tiny test, 3 taps of my pinky against the case. A second later, 3 pinky taps in the frame. I felt ridiculous, and also like I'd reached a place where ridiculous might be the correct language. I put the phone away. You don't negotiate with a copy using a camera. You force the rules to change. I crossed the street. 1 step down, 2 across, 3 up. My shoulder brushed a hedge. The scent of juniper pinched my nose. On his side, the figure did not cross to meet me. He stayed opposite, preserving the distance as if the yellow center line were a law neither of us had written. We walked parallel, 2 outlines kept apart by traffic that didn't exist. If I raised my hand, his rose after a beat. If I put both hands in my pockets, his pockets swallowed his hands a second later. A dog's bark ahead snapped twice, and then, as if the second had been scheduled, the bark repeated from farther back, ghosted. I realized I was listening for my own sounds before I made them. Halfway down Barrow, I reached a stop sign with a sticker on it. Someone had drawn a lopsided halo above a smiley face, and I used the doodle as a handle for my nerves. I could hold on to that tiny vandalism and remember a world with children and jokes. I whistled 2 notes under my breath, the second lower than the first. Across the street, a breathy attempt answered 2 beats late, not really a whistle, more the shadow of a whistle. The porch light at the ranch house snapped on, lit the figure in a hard slice that refused to show anything but shape. No features obeyed me. I didn't try to see a face. The hood was a decision I let the night keep. I cut left on Claremont, and my careful walk became a controlled jog. The figure jogged. A breeze lifted and folded flags against poles. Mine fell first, his fell after. The number on my mailbox appeared ahead like a small lighthouse, bright reflective decals catching the lamp. I could be home in 20 seconds. I almost sprinted, almost fell for the promise that if I reached my door fast enough, the rules would become mine again at the threshold. But another thought came up behind me with the stubborn weight of a hand on my shoulder. If the delay held through my lock code, he'd reach his door across from mine, and his code would chirp just after my chirp, and part of me did not want to know whether that sound would match. I forced myself to slow down. 3 breaths, quiet. I climbed my 3 steps as if they'd always been walked at that speed. The motion light came on. Moths wrote frantic, soft letters in the warm halo above the glass. Across the street, the figure arrived at the shadowed pocket between a boxwood hedge and a maple, and stood as if politely waiting for me to lead. The keypad beeped once when I pressed the last digit. Across the way, a faint second beep answered like an echo. I opened my door, heavy because I once sanded it badly and now it drags, and stepped inside. Cedar and detergent greeted me. I turned the deadbolt. The solid metal tongue sliding home felt like a prayer. I tell myself I'm not curious, Then I put my eye to the peephole. The fisheye made the opposite curb a shallow bowl. The figure occupied the exact latitude the geometry allowed. As I watched, he lifted his right hand to his chest and pressed his palm there, almost a pledge, almost a sigh. The urge to mimic drained through me like a slow current. I held my hands at my sides. The figure's left hand rose toward his hood as if to lower it. This time I felt the pull not as suggestion, but as instruction, a delayed hunger for emotion I hadn't chosen. I stepped back from the door so fast my heel thumped the baseboard. My heart made a punchy sound against my ribs, energetic and almost embarrassed. I turned on every light downstairs and stood in the back doorway to my tiny yard like a person deciding which ocean to jump into. Night pressed a clean, cool sheet over the grass. I waited until my hands stopped wanting to copy. When I checked the peephole again, the curb was empty. Empty like a question smudged off a whiteboard. The neighbor's sprinkler sputtered once and quit. An electronic hush replaced the street's small mechanics. I slept with the hall light on and went to work anyway, because jobs don't care how your night was. At lunch, I asked Dale, the old guy who knows every rumor in 3 counties, if he'd ever heard of someone being shadowed on a quiet block. He told me a story about a mall where footsteps followed people 2 seconds behind. Sometimes you're not first across a place, and it takes a minute for time to agree on who's leading. I laughed, because I needed a way for words to push back against the part of me that was still standing at my peephole. 2 days later, I asked my neighbor if his porch cam had caught anything around 3. He loves to show me clips of squirrels flipping his trash lid like strong men, so he pulled up the app. 2 videos. First, 3:12 a.m. Me walking along the far sidewalk, alone, hands in pockets, doing nothing odd. Second, 3:14 a.m. The same patch of pavement, empty. Same 2-note chime at the start of each clip. The pixels in the lower right corner barely shifted between frames. Dale would have called it nothing happening correctly. My neighbor said possums set it off all night. He zoomed in and pointed at a smudge that did not change. He said, "See?" I nodded, and did not say that some changes you feel don't care to be filmed. I tried not to walk at 3 anymore. I bought a second-hand bike, a rattly thing that made me brave with speed. The car eventually came back from the shop, but the bike remained a comfort. Still, routine wraps its hand around you again if you let it. 1 week later, inventory ran late, and I found myself turning onto Maple at exactly the hour I'd promised myself I'd avoid. The block looked the same, which is to say it looked like it always wanted to look. I told myself I'd stay on the phone with a friend the whole way. The call dropped at the office park, unusual but not unheard of. On Maple, under the beehive lamp, the hooded figure stood where he had stood, hands in pockets, head tipped slightly down as if to set a tone. I felt my chest grow smaller around my heart and I understood in one clean line that I could not afford to be clever again. I did not test him. I did not scratch my jaw or tug my sleeve. I did not slow. I did something ugly and true, the kind of move a copy would not expect because no one rehearses it. I sat down on the curb and untied the wrong shoe, the one that wasn't loose, and let the laces spill in a sloppy tangle. I hummed the worst song I knew, off-key, the one they played at the store in December until we all hated it. I took my keys out and dropped them on purpose. The clatter was louder than it should have been, like metal in a small auditorium. I counted backward from 19, wrong. Then I stood, left the laces swinging, and walked. Across the street, the figure hesitated, as if the delay had hit a knot in the script. 2 seconds passed, with nothing to mirror. 3. He raised his hand halfway, left it there, and let it fall. I turned onto Barrow without checking if he followed, because the point wasn't to win, the point was not to play. At my door I punched the code with deliberate mistakes, 2 wrong digits, then the right ones. The lock chirped, annoyed, and then obedient. Inside, lights on, deadbolt thrown, I put my forehead against the door and breathed until my breath felt mine. I did not look through the peephole. That self-control, as small as it sounds, is the only victory I claim. I've had normal nights since. I still see my neighbor's ring clips, me alone, the street empty, the chime cheerful and dumb. But sometimes I catch myself in the convex mirror at the end of the store's cleaner aisle, and the me in the mirror moves a whisper late, and I stand there until the law of reflected light snaps back into place. Sometimes a flag folds against a pole and another folds after, and I count a beat and let the counting end there. If you want a moral, I don't have one. I have advice. If you find yourself on a block that knows you too well and a stranger across the way is you but late, don't keep proving it to yourself. Don't keep feeding it tests. Make a mistake no one rehearses. Drop your keys. Hum something awful. Tie the wrong shoe. Step off the script until whatever is matching you has nothing neat to match. Then go home and let the door be heavy and wrong in the way you made it, and keep the street the street. That's enough. Here's the story that made me quit using the showers at long-haul truck stops unless the sun is up. I'd been driving cross-country runs for 6 years and thought I knew the rhythms of the road, the lonely fuel islands at 3 in the morning, the vending machines with stale sandwiches, the glassy look in another driver's eyes when you both realize you haven't spoken to anyone outside a CB in days. You get used to the strange comfort of truck stops, their sameness, their neon, their echoing tiled showers. I never thought I'd be afraid of them. But one night in Kansas, headed east after a 14-hour push, I learned otherwise. The stop looked like any other. Rows of rigs lined up like sleeping animals, the whine of reefers keeping time, sodium lamps buzzing overhead. I parked my Freightliner at the far end, locked it, and slung a duffel over my shoulder. The main building glowed like an oasis. Glass doors, racks of chips, a bored clerk scrolling his phone. The showers were down a tiled hallway that smelled like bleach and wet socks. I paid, they gave me a plastic key card, and I followed the arrows past vending machines to a row of heavy white doors with metal handles. I picked stall number 4. Inside, beige tile, a bench, a plastic chair, a drain that looked older than the rest of the room. Everything was normal. Normal makes you careless. I undressed, hung my clothes on the hook, and let the hot water hammer my shoulders. The sound filled the room, loud enough to erase everything else. For 5 minutes I just stood there, letting road dust and caffeine sweat pour off me. Then, underneath the hiss of the water, I heard something. A drip, not mine. A faint rhythm, like someone else shifting under a spray. The rooms were supposed to be private, self-contained. I turned off my shower and held my breath. Through the wall, faint but there, was the sound of another stream stopping half a beat after mine. Not at the same time, after, like a delayed echo. I stood wet and shivering, waiting. Then I moved. I rubbed my hands together, slapped my chest once, the way you do when you're cold. From the wall came the faint, muffled sound of hands slapping skin a second later. I whispered, low enough that my throat barely shaped it. "Hello?" From the wall came a breathy repeat, "Hello," blurred, like someone speaking underwater. My scalp prickled. The building was almost empty. I'd seen no one else in the hallway. I dressed in a hurry, clothes sticking to damp skin, and yanked the door open. The corridor stretched empty in both directions, silent except for a flickering light at the far end. I checked the other stalls. Every door was propped open, lights off, empty. But when I stepped back into mine, the shower was running again. Not full pressure, just a thin stream, steady, as if someone had left it on low. The water was cold. I grabbed my bag and left, but the hallway didn't let me off easy. As I walked, my wet shoes squeaking on tile, I realized another set of squeaks followed half a beat behind. I stopped. The squeaks stopped, late. I walked again. Squeak, squeak. Behind me, squeak, squeak. I didn't look back. At the front counter, the clerk glanced up, and I wanted to tell him, but his eyes looked wrong, glassy, unfocused, as if he were waiting for me to give him a line in a script. I muttered something about shower leaking and walked fast toward the lot. My truck loomed like a lifeboat. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there with the sleeper light on until dawn. At 3:12 a.m., my cab CB crackled to life, though I hadn't touched it. A voice, breathy, familiar, said, "Hello?" in the exact way I'd said it in the shower. Then static, then silence. I turned the dial off and left it off. I've stopped at that exit twice since, both times in daylight. The showers are still there, perfectly ordinary. Beige tile, metal drains, white doors with handles. Drivers go in and out whistling, joking, brushing their teeth. I never step past the hallway. I gas up, grab coffee, and leave. Because I know what waited in stall 4 at 3 a.m. wasn't another driver. It wasn't me being tired. It was something that, like the rhythm of people, something that wants to follow half a beat late until you get curious enough to let it lead. I don't give it the chance.
Here's the story I only tell when someone asks me why I won't sleep in backcountry shelters anymore, even if a storm's rolling in and the map says there's a roof a mile ahead. Last October, I took a solo loop in the San Juans in Colorado. Shoulder season, when the aspens have mostly gone to coins and the trail crowds thin out to the stubborn and the foolish. I planned 3 nights and 4 days, nothing heroic, just a circuit of ridge lines and timber with a climb that would earn a sunrise. The weather app said cool and clear. The ranger at the tiny station warned me that the forecasts up high are flatter than the realities. I had the usual gear, a stove that always sounds like it's boiling its own patience, and a rule I thought I'd stick to. No shortcuts that other people swear by in their trip reports. The first day went as days should. A steady climb, my breath sorting itself into workable pieces. Switchbacks that felt like someone practicing a careful handwriting up a slope. Elk tracks crossed the trail like punctuation. Around late afternoon, the light went clean and yellow, and a thin wind found the cuff of my jacket. The note it made against the nylon was small and sharp, like the sound a match makes before flame. I reached the meadow where I'd planned to camp and found it more exposed than the topo lines had made it look. The western horizon looked bruised. I could smell snow in the way the air thinned and the sage lifted its scent like a made promise. The rule about staying put pressed one shoulder, and the rule about not being an idiot pressed the other. I took out the map and saw a dotted line that wasn't on my printout, an unofficial spur that paralleled a creek and, according to the pencil note in someone else's handwriting, led to an old line shack, solid roof. I could make it before dark if I moved. The spur wasn't a real trail so much as a suggestion the forest made every 50 feet. Deer paths braided and unbraided. My GPS lost its sense of self under the canopy. I followed the sound of water until the trees opened into a small bowl that felt like a held breath. The cabin sat there like it had grown out of the ground instead of been built. One story, unpainted boards silvered by weather, a low roof that had been reshingled sometime in the last decade with mismatched asphalt shingles. The door was thick, the window small. A metal stovepipe leaned like a tired man. There was no sign, no plaque, nothing official. It looked both tended and neglected in the way of things that are loved by one person who hasn't told anyone else. I circled once like a cautious dog. The ground around the cabin was compacted, as if many boots had walked there and then been erased by seasons. A length of chain lay coiled under the window, as if for a plan that never happened. When I pushed the door, it went at the second try, wood sticky against wood. Inside, the light was the color of tea. Dust formed its own small weather in my headlamp beam. There was a cot with a blanket folded on it, a potbelly stove with a kettle on top, a shelf with a coffee can full of nails, a hammer, a coil of baling wire, a deck of cards whose top few had stuck together into a foxed curl. Above, centered in the ceiling, a square cut into the boards. An attic hatch, no ladder, just a blank outline with a loop of wire for a handle, like the room had a second mouth that someone had politely closed. I told myself honest things. I was tired. The weather was changing, and a roof is a tool. I also told myself dishonest things, that the smell in the place, pine tar and something older, was only wood, and the hush wasn't the hush of a place that has been quiet too long. I set my pack down, and the house answered with a settling sound I could map to beams and temperature. When I touched the stove, it was cold,
The kettle sounded empty when I shifted it. I collected a few fistfuls of dried duff and twigs from the leeward side and nursed a fire up in the stove until it took, doing that little dance stoves do between not enough and just enough. The small warmth changed the air, and with it my idea of the place. I unrolled my bag on the cot and told myself I'd be out at dawn, an ungracious guest who left the woodpile neater than I'd found it. Dusk arrived early under the trees. The window went from dark green to mirror. The first snow came as a dry hiss of grains against the roof and the stovepipe. When it became a steady whisper, I felt something unclench in me. Weather makes honest company. I cooked and ate and cleaned my cup with snow, and then put my headlamp on red and looked around for a guest book, because these places often row one. I found a notebook wedged between the shelf and the wall, spiral-bound, cover torn, a few pages half stuck together by old humidity. The first entries were years old, hikers' block letters about mice and storms and gratitude. A few joked about the attic hatch. No ladder, no thanks. Then the handwriting got more careful. The date stopped. Someone had written in small script that leaned right, "When the wind is from the west, it comes down, and when it is from the east, it waits." I read that twice without understanding, and then put the notebook back because I didn't want the words to take up more room than the room. I lay down. The stove ticked and sighed the way metal does when it remembers past fires. The snow on the roof found a rhythm, a slow sift that sounded like the house thinking. The attic hatch above me had become a piece of night inside. I closed my eyes and listened to my own breath. It's a good trick in the back country. Set your breath to an even measure and let the woods fit around it. I was almost asleep when a new sound arrived, soft as an initial. A board flexed above me. Not a squeak, more the groan of old wood agreeing under weight. I held my breath, and the sound waited the polite span of time someone waits for you to finish, and then the board flexed again, another foot or two away. The pattern was wrong for an animal. Mice make small rain out of their feet. Squirrels scrabble. This was step, consider, step. I sat up with the reflexive slowness that you learn if you've ever had to wake to a noise you don't want to scare into something worse. The attic hatch was a square of darker dark. Dust sifted through the seam in a fine line like chalk drawn in air. I told myself wind moves in strange ways, that branches drop, that snow can sound like footsteps if you want it to. Then the steps crossed the ceiling to the far wall and stopped above the door. The pause had weight. Above the door, a tiny patter like grit, and then the lightest drag along the seam of the hatch, as if a fingertip had traced the edge to learn you could open it this way or that. I looked at my pack. I looked at the stove. I looked at the wire loop hanging from the hatch and told myself not to stand directly under it. It is a bad idea to go looking for an upstairs when there's no legal way to go upstairs, but humans do bad ideas when the alternative is pretending we didn't hear the thing we heard. I pulled the chair onto the hatch and set the nail can on the chair and the hammer on the nail can, and then stood on the hammer, an unstable little tower that made my ankles talk to me, the way you stack in a dream when the rules of weight are suggestions. My head was inches from the hatch. Close, the seam was an uneven ellipse, paint worn to raw board where fingers had worked it. I lifted my hand to the wire loop and then didn't, because the thing you change is the thing that owns you after. I pressed my palm flat to the wood beside the loop. It was faintly cold. On the other side of the board, at that spot where my palm was, a pressure pressed back, that same size, that same shape, as if the attic had a hand and it had been waiting to meet the thing I would do. I took my hand away, the way you do from a stove that's almost too hot. The chair wobbled. The can sang a little tin note. On the ceiling above the door, the board flexed again, then again, closer. A slow approach that respected the pace of my heart. I stepped down, picked up the chair, placed it quietly against the wall, turned the kettle lid in a circle so the loose metal could explain any future noise for me, and sat on the cot with my back to the log wall so I could see the hatch and the door at once. I told myself ridiculous things, that the right song could fix this, that a prayer I didn't believe in might convince a physics I did. I counted the stove's ticks as it cooled and reached numbers I won't admit because they made no sense to the scheme of minutes. At some point, I slept. I know because I woke to silence so complete that I could hear the small woolly sound of blood in my ears. The stove was dead. The snow had stopped. The darkness inside the cabin felt heavier than the dark out of doors, like one had been poured into the other. Before I could decide on a movement, a new sound came. Not above me now, but outside, on the roof, just over the window. A step, slow. Another. The soft drag of something that didn't need to hurry. The steps crossed the roof to the back of the cabin. I waited for the sound of something dropping to the ground. Instead, the door flexed slightly in its frame, wood against wood, the way doors breathe when someone stands on the porch boards and weight moves the world enough for hinges to understand. I was up and at the door without choosing to be. The chain inside was a loop of baling wire through an eye. I slipped it, opened the door an inch, and let in a draft that touched my face with a smell like iron and wet bark. The porch boards held their own temperature. Nothing moved on them. The air felt like an ear angled to listen. I closed the door, threaded the wire, and said, because you bargain even with houses, "I'll leave at first light. You can have it back." Saying it made the place feel occupied in a new way, as if I had finally acknowledged the second tenant's rights. The sound above returned to the footfalls that had woken me the first time, slow and considerate, crossing from one corner to the other. Then, from the inside of the ceiling, 3 taps with a pause between each, so soft I could have imagined them, if imagining were a thing I trusted. The taps answered once more from the door frame behind me, wood answering wood, and then nothing else until the window grayed. Morning thinned the room enough that the dust decided to glitter. The hatch looked like a dull coin. I stepped outside into air that felt new. Snow in the clearing came up just over my boot tops. On the roof, no drift lay where something might have walked. The porch boards showed nothing but wind's messy handwriting. In the soft crust of snow 10 feet out from the cabin, I found prints, but not the kind you want to find an explanation for. They were like the marks you get when you press 2 fingers into flour and then pull them up. A double oval repeated in a path that circled the cabin and then lost interest in one direction and sharpened in another. When I followed the sharp track to the back wall, it went right up to the boards and stopped, as if the wall had accepted the visitor into itself, or the visitor had chosen the wall the way water chooses a path and then isn't a person anymore. I didn't go looking for more. I packed with the economy of someone settling a debt. I left the blanket folded, the kettle empty and lid off, the chair back under the table. The notebook on the shelf I opened one last time without meaning to, as if hands have their own language. A new line had appeared under the neat warning in the careful hand, written in what looked like a dull pencil. When you sleep here, let it walk. If you interrupt the walking, it will wait where you stopped it. I didn't take the notebook. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I stepped out and closed the door and did not look back at the hatch. Finding the main trail again took longer than getting to the cabin had. My GPS woke up, then forgot me, then woke again. The forest made the same suggestions it had the day before, only in different places. Twice I found myself in small clearings that looked almost like the cabin's bowl, the same ratio of trees, the same tilt of ground, and felt the same tight fist of wrongness in my chest until some detail didn't match and the fist let go. When the real trail caught my boots again, the relief felt like water after too much salt. I made the ridge by noon, and the world opened. Peaks like the backs of animals, sky so clean it made your teeth ache. A pair of ravens crossed below me like parts of a thought. I could see weather reshaping itself over distant counties. That night I slept on the lee side of a talus slope with my tent freestanding and my headlamp hung as low as it would go. The wind tried to talk. I didn't answer. It's hard to explain the absence of a thing when the thing did not announce itself with a proper entrance, but the quiet of the second night contained an outline where the first night's walking should have been. In the morning, Frost on the tent zipper wrote a small, beautiful script I couldn't read. I broke camp early and went out by the long way, the one that keeps you high and then dumps you down a fire road, with your knees filing complaints you'll answer later. In town at the ranger station, I asked for a line shack by a creek near a meadow with a bold feel. The younger ranger looked puzzled, and the older ranger looked at my boots and said, "You mean the decoy?" I asked him what he meant. He shrugged like a man who knows stories and collects them in a pocket. Some hunters swear there's a shack down Little Dry Creek. Some go in, some don't. On maps it moves. Elk track right around that whole patch of woods. I don't put it on the board because what would I write? Here be structure. I laughed more than the comment earned, because laughter is a way to put air back where something else has been pressing. I bought a coffee and drove home and let the radio be normal and loud. For a week my apartment felt thin in the ceiling, as if another floor would drag its feet soon. It never did. If there's a moral, it's the same one I learned in a different way on a suburban street and in a truck stop shower. Don't add your movement to a rhythm you didn't choose. If an old roof asks for you to listen, listen and let it finish its part. If you are asked to open a door without stairs beneath it, leave that as a kindness for the thing that needs to keep walking. And if you ever find a roof where there shouldn't be one, and the map says nothing, and the air smells like old pine pitch and a promise you didn't make, sleep outside, even if the snow is fine and the wind polite. The dawn will make you honest again. The house will keep its upstairs. That's as fair as anything I've learned.